Hello everybody and welcome back to ChäoS. Let me go ahead and get my timer started. Suddenly, a shrill sound pierced my ears. It was almost akin to a female scream. The sound broke through my reverie, forcing me to acknowledge that Nanami's entrance and her battle plan and whatnot had all been part of a convenient delusion. The air trembled, blown by a savage wind. A scarlet glow consumed my field of sight. Uncertain of what had happened, I turned my face toward the light. On top of the container housing, when I looked up, there stood the form of Aoi Senna, her D-sword in hand. Her D-sword's flashing was the source of the light, but it was strange. When I saw it before, I was sure Senna's D-sword had given off a blue light. The sound soon vanished into nothingness. The wind died down as well. A sharp voice, a cold gaze. There was patent enmity in Senna's eyes. As she spoke, she thrust out my essay, the one with the IR2 doodle drawn on the back of it. For some reason, it was covered in wrinkles. Why did Senna have it? Why was Senna here? Breaking and entering, those words floated up in my head. I realized she'd searched my room. What for? It was Kozapi's inner voice. She was behind Senna's back. She crawled on all fours, sticking her head out in our direction. Her expression was terribly tense. At almost the exact same time that Kozapi yelled, Senna jumped down, with the sword raised over her head. Rumi pulled my arm hard, sending me tumbling backward. I raised my head in a flurry and looked at the place where I'd previously been standing. Senna's sword gouged the surface of the roof. Dreadful with its unreal sharpness and destructive power. It had been an impact sufficient to shatter concrete, but the sword itself bore not a scratch. Weren't D-swords supposed to be swords people couldn't see or even touch? A certain word flittered across the back of my brain. Her sword had been real-booted. Senna's D-sword, having attained the local shared recognition of the four of us here in this place, was real, not a delusion. It was a great sword that could actually cut people's lives away. If Rimi hadn't pulled at me, that beautiful sword would have sliced me cleanly through the head. Instant death. Trembling bolted through my whole body. Just now, Senna had unmistakably tried to kill me. Why? My head was full of doubts and questions. Before this, she and Kozapi and I had eaten crunchy-kuns together as a trio. We definitely weren't close enough that you could call us friends, and even back then she'd kept her intimidating attitude till the very end. Even so, it shouldn't have been such a sour relationship as to make her attack me with her D-sword out of the blue. Senna raised her face. She glared at me harder still. Her movements were swift. Despite the fact that she carried such a vast sword, she sprang forward from the ground like a sprinter lunging out of a crouching start. She swung her sword as though to make its tip cut a line in the ground. Closing the distance between us, she raised it on high. My instincts awoke to the nature of the situation in an instant. She was serious. Senna truly. I lay collapsed gracelessly on my back. I'd lost my voice. I couldn't escape. All too unreasonable. All too sudden. To think I'd hit a game over like this. To think I'd get ambushed by Senna after desperately fleeing Shogun. No. I don't want to die. I don't want to die. There. A single human form leapt forward, diving between me and Senna standing in the way. When I looked, Rumi's back was before me. She had both her arms spread out as though to block Senna's path as she charged at me. She would risk harm to protect me?
どけ。
But then Rimi would die. No, I couldn't take that.
崎畑さんには気をつけて。
Suddenly, I remember that Kozupi, or what Kozupi had said to me before. A pale light overflowed into Rimi's outspread hands.
崎畑さんはよくわかんないのら。
Rimi,
タクに手を出さないで。
she crossed her hands over each other as though to bind the overflowing light together. The air trembled. Glittering feathers of light from somewhere danced about her. That which materialized in her hands.
なんだと。
She caught and stopped Senna's colossal, furiously lowered sword with ease.
タクを追い詰めないで。
It was far too graceful and far too divine to be called a sword. So much so that one might mistake it for an angel's wings. And I then understood. She too, Sakihata Rimi too, was a gigalomaniac. Aoi Senna stared at the face of the girl in front of her with astonishment. The sword, shaped like a pair of wings, which had stopped the attack from Senna's D-sword without any difficulty, was clearly a D-sword itself. If she weren't accustomed to handling it, she wouldn't have been able to catch Senna's blow with such excellent timing.
崎畑さんもギガロマニアックスだったのら。
Kozue gazed at Senna and the others from atop the container housing. As if she were sightseeing from the sidelines, she sat on the edge, kicking her hanging legs a little in the air. Quite a carefree attitude for having interfered with her surprise attack a few seconds ago, Senna thought, clicking her tongue inwardly. But her eyes didn't slide away from Rimi, right in front of her. Rimi, in contrast, had a brooding expression. Behind Rimi, the pathetically crumbled Nishijo Takumi let out a moan. He was Senna's ultimate target, and she had no intention of fighting with Rimi. Moreover, this wasn't a manga or anime, and it was probably unrealistic to conceive of a battle between D-swords.
その男が何をしたか知っているのか。 IR2 という公式を。
知ってるよ。
She cut off Senna's words, a quiet, sorrowful, but distinct answer. Hearing it, Senna gripped her D-sword harder.
それなら。
タクを覚醒させればもっと大変なことになる。
その前に殺す。
あなたには無理だよ。
There was no point in talking to her, Senna deemed. She took a stance to protect the distance between them. Rimi, on the other hand, only stood there casually. It would take about 5 large strides to reach the slumped-over Nishijo Takumi, a distance from which she could bring things to an end in 3 seconds. Senna, unhesitatingly, lunged straight at Rimi. Aiming for her, Senna swept her D-sword horizontally. Rimi attempted to catch it in the same way she had before, but Senna's flashing attack was a feint. Her sword passed through Rimi's sword and body. She'd undone the real booting. Now Senna's D-sword was no more than a delusion. Unable to touch anything, unable to cut anything, unable to kill anything. But that was exactly what she'd aimed for. Rimi, who had braced herself to receive the attack, reacted too slowly. In the meantime, Senna had already slipped past her side and taken another 2 strides, closing in on Takumi. She reverted to a real booted state in an instant. With this, Takumi's eyes turned toward her, brimming with the hue of terror, and it took little effort for her to finish real booting. When she prepared to gore through Takumi's heart with her sword that had once again become part of reality.
Senna.
Someone's shadow filtered across the corner of her sight. The instant she heard that voice, she became deeply shaken, missed her mark. At the end of her sword grazed Takumi's feet, and the end of her sword grazed Takumi's feet and embedded itself in the concrete. Senna slowly raised her head and released a voice akin to a growl. At the edge of the roof, the deepening sunset at his back, a lone man stood there like a ghost. He looked sickly and pale, bloodshot eyes in sunken sockets. His head hung down, expressionless. The second she spotted him, Senna stopped caring about what became of Takumi. The man she had constantly been chasing, the object of her hatred. The man who had thrown her away and betrayed his family. The man was before her eyes.
ようやく見つけた。
Stepping toward him, Senna grit her teeth to endure her surging hatred. She readied her D-sword again. Another step forward.
どうしようもなかった。私はお前の母さんを生贄に捧げるしかなかったんだ。
黙れ。
母さんの最後はとても安らかなものだったよ。だからセナ、安心してほしい。母さんのおかげで素晴らしい実験結果が出た。母さんは世界のために役立ったんだ。お前も母さんの功績を誇っていい。
黙れよ。
When the blood rushed to her head, Senna no longer saw anything but the man's form. She ran. In an instant, Senna covered the distance between them in the blink of an eye, sprang at his chest, and stabbed him deep with her D-sword. It was Senna's dearest wish. She had wandered Shibuya every day solely for the sake of killing this man. She'd always dreamed of the day when she would kill him.
やっと母さんの仇を。
She tried to pull out her sword. She tried to move away from him. But it wouldn't come out. The man embraced her as if to enfold her.
よせ、気安く触るな。
All the fine hairs on her body stood on end. If he did such a thing to her now, after so much time, it would only horrify her. Senna had long since severed the family bond that had once existed between her and him. Yet she was shocked at herself for how, for some reason, she couldn't push him away. Warmth, a broad chest, the real sensation of her father, her red-stained hands.
私はこんなの。
あなた
お前が望んだ妄想だ。
望んだ妄想だよ。
At that whisper, Senna understood. An error had slipped into her dead spots, a psychological attack, bewitchery. Rimi had read her fantasies. By the time she realized her mistake, it was too late. Losing her balance, she toppled from the edge of the roof together with the man. To Senna, the ground, 8 floors below them, looked terribly distant. I could only watch it uncomprehendingly. Abruptly dashing to the edge of the roof, Senna lost her balance all on her own, and was at this very moment about to fall off. Her body threatened to disappear over the edge. All I could do was murmur. I closed my eyes tight. Suicide. Senna had plotted to kill herself by jumping off. I didn't know why. I wouldn't stand for knowing why. She'd attacked me out of the blue. Now she was receiving heavenly punishment. She'd been my enemy too. No matter how much time passed, I didn't hear the sound of her crashing below. I tentatively opened my eyes to see what was happening. Senna wasn't jumping. She'd slumped down. Senna wasn't falling. She'd slumped down. Rimi stood close beside her. She was gripping Senna's arm. Had Rimi saved her?
私はこんなの。
Senna wasn't jumping. She had slumped down. Her body threatened to disappear over the edge.
私は
I
こんなの。
didn't know why. I wouldn't stand for knowing why. She had Rimi saved her?
Asena flung away her D-sword and wept like a child. What the hell was going on with this sequence of events? To me, at least, it had only looked as though Senna were single-handedly trying to die.
辛い思いさせてごめんね。でもしょうがなかったの。
What had Rimi done to her? She was like another person compared to the usual cheery Rimi. A tormented expression, a sorrowful murmur, wavering eyes. A Rimi I didn't know was there.
先畑さん。
A voice resounded in my heart, as before, Kozapi watched how we were doing from the top of the container housing.
もう終了だよね。もしもセナさんのことぐしゃばきってしようとしてるなら、カズピ許さないもん。先畑さんのことバラバラにしちゃうよ。
My back went ice cold. Kozabi had the same airheaded anime-style voice as always, but she meant what she said.
もう終わり。もともと葵さんのことどうこうするつもりはないし、タクの前から消えてくれるならこのまま解放する。それは無理。だってコズピーとセナさんとタクミさんはお友達だもん。
I don't think we're exactly friends with Senna, considering she just tried to kill us.
ね、そうでしょタクミさん。
I couldn't think about anything. If someone told me everything happening now was a dream, I'd undoubtedly believe them. Why had Senna suddenly attacked me in the first place? Had she been my enemy all along?
お前のせいだ。
Senna, who had been sobbing, raised her face. She didn't attempt to wipe her tears. She was still collapsed on the ground. She stared at me harshly.
お前のせいで私の家族は。
I floundered. She battered me with raw emotion. What are you claiming I've done? I don't cause trouble for anyone, and I certainly didn't know a thing about Senna's family. I'm very much a harmless human being.
無害だと。
She'd read my mind.
お前が生み出したものが世界を滅ぼすかもしれないっていうのに。
Destroy the world? Another self-centered fantasy? I glanced at Rimi, seeking her help, but she stood with her back facing us, looking vaguely out at the darkening sky.
無駄だよ。
Her figure, her voice. Was it my imagination that they seemed horribly lonely?
タクは何も知らないから。
When Rimi said it that way, it seemed almost as if she knew everything it seemed as if she knew anything and everything.
ふざけるな。今渋谷を襲っている混乱は全部あの公式が発端なんだぞ。
Equation.
それ以上言わないで。タクは本当に何も知らないの。
It sounded like they were talking about me, but I myself couldn't keep up with their conversation.
公式ってこれのこと？
Kozabi descended from the container housing, holding my essay. That which was drawn there, the scribble I had written in elementary school. IR2. It was the origin of the chaos now besieging Shibuya. Talk about a false accusation. Of course a doodle like that couldn't possess such power. I had truly been in a light-hearted frame of mind when I drew this doodle. I must have been. Because it had happened so long ago, I couldn't remember too well, but... It bore no particular meaning. I'd only copied the numbers that appeared in a dream of mine. A dream related to the Whose Eyes Are Those essay written on the front. I'd used those words since the distant past, and at some point they attained more and more of a shape in my dreams. Therein lay the numbers.
FUN の10乗かける INT の40乗イコール IR2。
Senna had wiped her eyes at last, leaving them bright red. Even so, she remained crumbled, head lowered in apparent frustration as she wove her words.
この公式をお前が生み出した瞬間、世界は分岐したんだ。
ノア2に搭載されている中で最も秀でているのは、中核システムに組み込まれたとある方程式です。これは人類史上未だ回答が見つかっていないとされているもの。
ミレニアム7のうちの一つかね。
億単位の懸賞金がかけられているという数学界で未だ未解決の7つの問題か。
いいえ、その7つの中には入っていません。ですが、実はミレニアム7はもともと問題が8つあった。公開前に1つだけ削除されたのです。
それがノア2に組み込まれている方程式だと。
削除された理由は？
世界に最悪をまき散らす可能性があるためというところです。
一体どのような数式なのだ？
基本相互作用における電磁気力を想定した共鳴現象、それを表す計算式です。これにより特定の電磁パルスと受容体とが近接作用することで発現する未知の力が解明されました。各国が30年以上かけて開発し積み上げてきた沈黙の兵器の研究成果を一瞬にして過去のものとしてしまったんですよ。
その問題に回答を見つけた者は神になるに等しいというわけだ。
それを君が果たしたというわけかね。
それはとても不思議な場所から見つかりました。子供の落書きというね。IR2 ノア2のいわゆるハードウェア部分はこの公式によって神に匹敵する能力を手に入れました。あとはソフトウェア部分に相当するギガロマニアックスのコードサンプルを集めればノア2は本格的に稼働し我々の望むもの全てを実現してくれるでしょう。
かのアインシュタインが現代に生きていればと思うよ。彼は高い能力を持つギガロマニアックスだったと聞く。
家庭の話よりも現状がどうなっているかだ。ギガロマニアックスは世界中に数えるほどしかいないというではないか。大丈夫なのか？
すでに5人分のサンプルは確保しました。
ノア2稼働に十分な数は集まったようだね。
ならば結構。
ただサンプルが多ければ多いほどノア2の能力は向上します。特にどうしてもサンプルを採取したいギガロマニアックスの少年が一人いましてね。
だからといって計画の遅延は許されんぞ。
ノア2の本格稼働はいつ頃になりそうなのかね。
稼働前に最終実験としてサードメルトを行います。
また地震を起こそうと？
予測規模は？
想定では関東大震災と同レベル。
関東大震災クラスだと？
マグニチュード 7.9 だったかな。
現在の建築基準と免震対策レベルを考えれば町にかつてほどの大きな損害を及ぼすことはないでしょう。
だが 犠牲者の数はファースト、セカンドの日ではなかろう。
Probably.
およそ5000人ほどといったところです。少なく見積もってですが。問題が？
責任は貴様が取るのだろうな。
腹でも切って死んでみせますか？これが最終実験です。サードメルトが予定通りの成果を上げたとき、ノア2は完全なる完成を見る。世界の可能性は我らの手の中に。
この公式をお前が生み出した瞬間、世界は分岐したんだ。
分岐って。
This isn't an eroge.
タク、もう行こう。話聞く必要なんてないよ。
Remy pulled my hand entreating me to come in the room. A sense of desperation seeped out of her attitude. Remy was afraid of something.
葵さんが言ってることは全部嘘っぱちだし。
嘘はそっちだろ。
葵さん、もう帰って。タクの前から消えてよ。
Whose words should I believe?
たかが数式になんでそんなに目くじら立てるんだよ。
本当に何も分かってないのか。アインシュタインが唱えた E=MC の事情、これが発表されたことで核兵器が開発されるという未来が生まれたように。お前の生み出した IR2 もまた E=MC の事情と同じ、いやそれ以上の影響力を世界に与えている。 IR2 は沈黙の兵器を現実のものとした。
Okay.
沈黙の兵器。
思考盗撮、視覚投影、五感制御。
That was the technology from the patch I'd researched all over the place. The one Senna had told me about.
ギガロマニアックスは特別。いや、異常ではなくなる。これからはこの忌々しい力を誰もが自由に使えるようになるんだ。IR2 を元に作られた装置によってな。もっとも、その前に一握りの腐った連中に独占され、人々は気づかないうちに家畜同然の立場になるよう洗脳されてしまうだろうが。
I didn't know. You say that, but it's got nothing to do with me. Even assuming Senna spoke the truth, I hadn't deliberately planned on creating something so inconceivable. It was just little kids doodling. I haven't done anything wrong.
そのアイアーム2は
IR2。
それはギガロマニアックスの力のことをキュッピーンって説明したものなんだ。やっぱりあのおじさんが言ってたのは本当だったのら。一番重要なのはその目、誰の目を生み出した少年なんだって。それってタクミちゃんのコートだったんだね。
Kozupi's perky voice. I couldn't regard it as innocently as she did, nor did Remy offer any reply. Except Senna alone widened her eyes, raised her face with a start, swayed upright. Why was she so unsteady on her feet? Maybe because of whatever Remy had done to her earlier.
小杖、お前、今なんて言った？
ホピ
Senna pressed in on the puzzled Kozupi.
おじしゃんって誰のことだ？
コズピーに理想度の大切さを教えてくれた人。東京に来て初めて話した人なの。
And I imagine she's probably talking about Shogun. Or, you know, at least the guy we refer to as Shogun.
なんかね、ふぎゅーって鼻つま 業とか？
なんでそれを早く言わなかった？
そんなこと言われても。
I mean, she had every reason to believe the dude's a frickin' maniac.
あいつだ。やっと見つけた。
Rimi, Kozapi, and I. None of us had any idea what she was talking about. All we could do was dazedly watch Senna and her blood-curdling demeanor.
私はやっと
Uh,
あいつを殺せる。
unless Senna for some reason thinks it's her father that Kozapi is referring to as the old guy. Okay, well, that is going to be it for this part. I will see you all next time. A quick reminder that I do have a Patreon and a Discord. You can find links to those down below in the description. If you want to stay up to date with what's going on with the channel, I do highly recommend that you join the Discord as my go-to place for posting about any changes to the channel. As for Patreon, that is one of the two major ways to support the channel if you wish to do so. The other option is via Streamlabs. You can do one-time or monthly donations via Streamlabs for a number of months now. That's been added as an option. If you go the Patreon route, you do get some goodies, such as early access to videos. However, if you go the Streamlabs route, you get, well, nothing beyond just the good feeling that you know more of what you give actually reaches the channel, because Patreon takes a 5% cut. But that'll be it for this video. I will see you all next time. Until then, goodbye and farewell.